The agenda this week delved into cancer research, paid attention to distracted driving, and debated campaign finance reform in Ontario. First up, the agenda's Week in Review asks, has big city housing become a luxury good? Let's have a look. Jay, if there were a greater role for the province of Ontario to play in achieving some of the goals that you've set out, what might that be?
I think I'm going to go back to what was mentioned about having a national housing strategy. I really believe that it starts there.
What does that mean?
So it's setting out like an imperative and some guidelines, which provinces could then amend to their particular situations, and municipalities as well. And it's also creating more flexible funding formulas for housing also. So I think we need that. We need an articulation coming from the top that could then again be implemented in community on the local level. So I think we need that. And I also think, and I definitely think that provincially there should be more of an allocation of resources for sure. And I also think, so I'm going to go back to, oftentimes I think that when we get stuck, we go to government, that government needs to take more of a role. And I think that given the work that I do in terms of placemaking, I think that we need to figure out what all of our roles are and then how we could mobilize to get government to do what it's supposed to do, which is work for us.
Okay.
So that's
one of the ideas they had in British Columbia was a 15% tax on offshore purchases of real estate in the city. What do you think of that idea for Ontario?
I don't support it, obviously. I mean, if we did have to do something like that, I would say only on low-rise housing, resale housing. A lot of the foreign buyers actually support the development of new condominiums. They buy in pre-construction, allow them to get built, and they rent the units out, so providing that needed rental housing supply. So if we're pushing them back, or we're saying, you know what, we're not friendly to immigrants, then that's an issue going forward. A lot of foreign buyers that buy housing is because they want to move here, right? We're just bringing forward demand.
But I think the BC issue was they actually weren't buying to move here. They were buying just to be landlords, and British Columbians felt upset about the fact that, quote unquote, their land was being owned by people who had no intention of moving here.
Yeah, and I mean, again, we don't have the numbers to break down where that sits, and I think it's the pure investor is actually fairly small. When you've looked at studies, and the National Association of Realtors did a study in the United States that showed the pure investor, pure foreign investors just buying to either hold it as vacant or rent it out is actually fairly small. A lot of it is they actually want to eventually move there, so or they actually have ties here of their son is in school, or their relative, or in some instances, their wife is already living in that country, right? And the unit's been bought in their name. So I don't think it's a good idea. It's more about foreign capital in some instances, not actually the foreign buyers. So.
Melanie, how about that 15% tax? It's happening in BC. Should we do it in Ontario?
I think we should focus more on partnerships and finding ways through, and as Ben has mentioned, inclusionary zoning and other kind of tools. The City of Toronto has established the Door Open policy, which again, in addition to their housing policy, looks to find partnerships with developers as they're coming forward to deliver a public objective, a city objective. So I think there are ways, I think we need to push that before we start putting more taxes on
citizens. How about apartments? More apartments, more rental?
I think that's absolutely, and we see that the market has responded to that. You know, there are, for decades, have been rental housing protection policies in place to make sure that the rents don't rise too fast and that we keep that stock. But what we see in the last 5 years is almost every project we see coming forward in the core of the city has a rental component, some of which is affordable. And sometimes that's the way the developers are actually addressing the affordable side. But I think the broadening the house form and the tenure, so whether you're owning or renting, or you're in a cooperative circumstances, all of those are solutions that we need to kind of broaden the opportunity to kind of bring forward.
Jay, you pointed out earlier in the program, you lived part of your life in social housing. For a lot of people, there's a stigma around living in social housing. Not everybody, but some people, and some of the social housing going up today is actually so beautiful that you don't even know that it's quote unquote social housing. But if there is a stigma around it, how do you get rid of that?
Well, I think that firstly, you addressed the repair backlog as a start. And I also think that mixed development is a really, I think that's the way forward. And I also think it's really complicated because now you have intergenerational poverty and intergenerational isolation. So I think it will take a really long time to undo that.
Got to have upward mobility or there's no hope. Is that the idea?
Absolutely. Lateral mobility as well. Like people who live in social housing can't even like get first and last together to move down the street somewhere. So I think that's really important. But I think that as a model, it's a flawed model. I think we've all come to terms with that. And having a concentration of poor people, that wasn't maybe the best idea. So I think we've come to terms with that. And I think the future is really about, again, living with each other and developing mixed income housing.
Do you like what they've done with Regent Park?
I would have to say I do. I think that it's too early to weigh in. I think that the telling fact will be whether or not people who, the longer standing tenants and the new tenants, actually share space together in a meaningful way. So it's beautifully designed, but I think that the metric for great design is great community cohesion. And so that's what I'm looking for in the next decade.
Melanie, I got a minute left here, and I do remember covering Queen's Park 30 years ago and the then Premier David Peterson saying that the skyrocketing housing prices in Toronto were quote unquote a sweet headache. On the one hand, it does indicate that a lot of people want to come here. Right. On the other hand, it's very hard to break in. But here we are 30 years later still talking about it. Do we have to just make our peace with this, that this is the way it's going to be and that's life?
I don't think we're going to change the trend. I think it is a positive trend, but I think we need a much more sophisticated palette of ways of dealing with this and thinking about the kinds of spaces we're designing, just as Jay is saying. Regent Park has some of the most spectacular community facilities, parks, and community amenities, whether you think about the Daniels Lightbox and all the rest. And I think that is a good model. I think we need to look for those. We need to look and push all our partners to forward.
I think it's the paint box.
The paint box, you're right.
The light box is
the
TIFF.
Yes.
But I knew what you meant.
It's the same model, right? And
Right.
it's then being applied at the community level. And I think that's interesting. So I think it's a significant problem with a real imperative, but wouldn't want to be going backwards. I wouldn't want to be doing what I see in some of the American cities where we work in terms of struggling to get people to live downtown and some of the increasing disparities you see there.
On that, I suspect there is consensus. Nobody wants to be, should I name names here? Nobody wants Detroit or Cleveland up here north of the 49th parallel. There's got to be a balance between a doctor's ability to use his or her expertise and a patient's ability to guide their own destiny. And I wonder whether you think when it comes to cancer treatment in the province of Ontario today, we have that balance right.
I think generally we're pretty good at it. I mean, I do think of Ontario as, one of the leaders in this. I think we do offer to our patients in a timely manner all the effective treatments out there for cancer. I don't think any Ontario patient's running into a disservice because an effective treatment's not listed on the Ontario.
No, but based on what you were saying earlier, it sounds like there's a lot of invasive treatment happening that the numbers suggest is not warranted.
I think we asked a question about surgery and we asked a question about medication. In terms of surgery, it is certainly the case where the patient has the option and the patient may drive it in the cost. For example, a patient recently I encountered, 6-year-old woman, she had a mammogram. I'm not a big supporter of mammography for various reasons we could talk about. So she went for a mammogram. They found a very small breast cancer, a low-grade 1 centimeter breast cancer, very, very high cure rate. There's some question even whether this would be life-threatening. She chose to have rather than a lumpectomy, which would have been the standard of care in days gone by, she chose for the bilateral mastectomy.
Bilateral, both.
Right, she was concerned about a bilateral mastectomy, and not only that, then she had a reconstruction. Well, the reconstruction is to create, new breasts, for various reasons, cosmetically, which is a 12-hour operation. Now, in the old days, she would be given a lumpectomy, which would be maybe an hour operation of a short time, and she'd be discharged after a couple of days. But to have a bilateral mastectomy, what we call a tram flap, which is an extensive breast reconstruction, for a relatively minor cancer in terms of the breast cancer.
You, so I can see you think it was not called for. And did OHIP pay for it
I
all?
would say just that was not called for.
And did OHIP pay for it all?
OHIP pays for that, yes. The other thing is that the surgeons in the past might have been reluctant to do it based on the ability for the operating room. In other words, if they didn't have, they'd say, well, listen, we don't have the capacity to do that. But to a large extent, based on the patient's choices, many of the hospitals, certainly all of the hospitals in the States, have adapted themselves to it. In other words, in the old days, people would say, well, we don't really operate bilateral mastectomies for unilateral breast cancers. That's not available. We don't have the resources. And the hospitals, particularly in the States, and maybe to some extent we follow this in Ontario, have adapted their schedules to say, well, if this is what the patients want, and we can bill the government and recover the costs, and maybe even make a profit doing so, we should be able to offer this to the patients.
There's so many perverse incentives in that story you just told. Don't you think?
Yeah, I certainly think I would, I'm not willing to cast blame at anyone. I would say, if anything, the Ontario government is exceedingly generous to be able to offer to all breast cancer patients, without any personal cost, the option of a bilateral mastectomy with bilateral reconstruction for a relatively small breast cancer that can certainly be treated with a lumpectomy. Nowhere along the line, Stephen, has anybody ever suggested that the surgery that she had improved her life expectancy. No one ever suggested that the bilateral mastectomy with the reconstruction reduced her chance of dying of breast cancer.
When did this happen?
It was all based on patient preference related to the ability to respond to the patient's wishes.
When did all this happen?
Well, I would say in the last couple of years.
Last couple of
I mean,
years.
when did the policy change? In
No,
this
no.
particular case?
When did this patient come forward? Like, I presume you tried to tell her.
There's issues of patient confidentiality. I don't want
I'm not going to ask for names and addresses.
It's
but
in
I'm
the 2015.
Okay, because I presume at some point you tried to convince her that the approach she was taking was more than she needed to do, and she clearly rejected your advice and decided
I
to go
wasn't
her
the
own
treating
way.
physician
Oh,
in
you
that
weren't.
case. This is a case that I'm using as
I see.
an example,
Okay.
but it's a case I'm aware of, but was not the treating physician. Certainly in that position, I would have recommended against it based on several things, not primarily based on cost to the government. I mean, it's very awkward for any physician to say to a patient, I recommend this course of action based on the cost to the government.
Right.
No one's going to say that. One can have this discussion. We can have this discussion. I can have this discussion in the halls of the university or with the Minister of Health, but you don't sit in front of a patient and say, you want this, but I don't think you should have this because it costs too much money
Okay,
to
just
the
out of
government.
curiosity, a lumpectomy would have cost how much?
In the hundreds of dollars.
And the double mastectomy with reconstruction surgery would have cost?
In the tens of thousands of dollars.
Is that one of the reasons why we don't have enough healthcare dollars to
Of
go?
course.
That is one of the reasons. Okay.
Patient choice for surgery, I think, is something that deserves close attention by the government. I think should patients make the decision to have particular surgeries based on cosmetic outcomes. I mean, in many cases, women have breast cancer reconstructions an expected and normal thing to have, particularly for those breast cancers where mastectomy is the norm. I mean, in the old days, when I talked about the introduction of chemotherapy in the 1980s, mastectomy wasn't used for reconstruction. We have to think of it as a wonderful advance in the treatment of breast cancer that we can now treat breast cancer with mastectomy and have reconstruction. So for many patients, that's an advantage. I am saying that when we evaluate these treatments, there are several endpoints. One of them is this cancer going to come back? One of them is the woman going to feel better about herself? Is it going to reduce fear and will improve her body image? And one is the woman going to die of cancer? Got to take a pretty cold look at all four things and make a decision. Should that be done at the individual basis for a doctor and a patient? Ideally, should it be done as a society, as medicine looks at ways of saving costs and optimizing care? Yes, of course, all of these are important.
Jesse, they've got websites and hashtags and all of the things young people like to try to make this more appealing to them. Do you think that kind of thing can work?
No, I don't think trying to persuade people, certainly at a theoretical level, is actually going to have an effect. I think consequences will have an effect. I think there's ways, for example, how car companies are, I think, actually part of the problem, because their notion of hands-free, and when they talk about the technology they build into cars, it's still about trying to give the consumer everything they want. When maybe one of the messages here is, no, you can't have your phone in the car. You want a car, that's a great privilege. You can't have the phone in the car, period. But instead, we keep all this language of, well, here's this technology that allow you to verbally tweet and will allow you to dictate text messages back and forth. So granted, maybe your hands are on the wheel, but where's your mind? And where's your attention? And I think that's where we're giving people mixed messages. That maybe this is an issue of discipline. That as long as you're really committed in the car, it'll be okay. Whereas I think it's entirely unconscious. If that phone is in reach and it goes off, you're going to reach for it because that's what you do all the other times of the day. So to even have that phone or to even have that technology accessible, I think adds to the dangerous situation.
Let's put this, Sergeant, into some kind of historical perspective here, because I remember when the initial campaigns against drunk driving came out. Sure. Mothers Against Drunk Driving, MAD, organizations bringing to bear a lot of public consciousness on this. But it still took 25 years to get people to actually stop drinking and driving, right? Yeah. Before it became socially unacceptable.
Right.
Is that the kind of campaign we're facing this time?
Well, I think so. It's an ongoing battle, I guess. The seatbelt law has been in place for 40 years, but people are still driving without being buckled and being ejected and being killed. One of our big causes of death and injuries. Impaired driving is certainly not eliminated because we still see it over and over again. Distracted driving is the same thing, and the feeling of invincibility and the fact that you've done it in the past. Someone who's been drinking at a bar and made it home safely, they have no idea how bad their driving was, but they made it home and they think their driving was pretty good. Same thing with a distracted driver. They've driven distracted so many times, and they think that because nothing happened, that they were a good driver. They have no idea how bad their driving was, and you can even see these drivers. Before they get their phones, typically they'll probably glance up, they'll take their foot off the gas, they'll slow down, they'll give themselves a little more cushion of space just to give them that buffer because they don't want to wreck. But again, it's one of those things, it can change in a heartbeat. Traffic stops and now you're to the back bumper of somebody. Maybe nobody's hurt or killed, but you're in a wreck and traffic is snarled.
Dr. Manson, can you help us understand if there is sort of a different psychology at play between texting while driving and drunk driving?
Yeah, I think that there are differences, but one of the biggest differences that I would highlight is social norms. So currently we think about driving under the influence, drunk driving, as being really stigmatized. And so that people will help their friends or their family members, they'll tell them don't drink and drive.
Take away their keys, all that stuff.
Exactly. Whereas with distracted driving, it's kind of the norm. People think it's the norm. We found that in our survey. Everybody's doing it. So I think that there is a difference in terms of the perception of what's the norm in our society. And once we start to get to a point where we're calling each other on, you're driving while distracted, don't, put down cell phone down, don't use it, don't text, don't listen, don't turn it on. That's, I think, when we're going to start to see some change. But both distracted driving and driving under the influence, they're both types of impairment, and they both cause cognitive impairment in our ability to respond and ability to react and put on the brakes in a timely way if there's a hazard on the road.
It did take a long time, though, before drunk driving became not a good thing to do, and everybody recognized it. How long do you think it'll take before texting and driving gets there?
Oh, I want to say I hope it doesn't take as long as it did with drunk driving, because that was enormous, massive societal effort, which was spearheaded by some very committed individuals. There was Mothers Against Drunk Driving. There was a whole social movement that happened. Can we accelerate that social movement for distracted driving would be a really important question.
Although, can you imagine the scenario? You've had lunch and friends, you both get into the car, you say, okay, but before we go, give me your phone. I'm gonna hold your phone while you drive. I mean, right there, you gotta fight, let alone creating the culture in which someone goes, okay, here's my phone, where they physically hand it over because they accept that they just can't drive without checking it. That might help expedite it.
You're Mr. Technology, so let me follow up with this question here. With the success of Uber, is distracted driving becoming a problem in the ride-hailing business?
I would say it's central to the success of the ride-hailing business. I mean, there's fantastic research that looks at how Uber drivers are essentially controlled by the Uber algorithm. It tells them where to pick up the passenger. It tells them how to navigate through the city. When they don't have the passenger, they've got 15 seconds from when an alert comes to when they can hail it. So even though they all have those little mounts, so it's not physically in their hand, they're spending way more time staring at that screen than they are the actual road. And as a cyclist, I notice this in terms of its contrast with cabs. Like, at least cabs, you know, are going to be a little cognitive distracted because of all the things going on. So as a cyclist, you sort of treat cabs with an extra level of distrust. But now I'm doing a pattern recognition to find Uber drivers because they're just as distracted as a cabbie, but they're not as easily identified. So you're constantly looking for that little phone in the window and the way in which the driver is constantly paying attention to that phone as another potential hazard when you're on the road.
Because the driver is always looking for a potential next customer or a pool to pick up along the way or that kind of
Or
thing?
if you think about the hierarchy of attention that a driver's going to allocate, the cyclist is almost always at the bottom of that hierarchy, right? They're rarely paying attention to people on two wheels. And so you, as the person on two wheels, you have to either A, make them pay attention to you, or be extra vigilant in terms of your own defensive stances, because there's all these distracted drivers going all over the place.
Sergeant, how much of all of what we're talking about today is an issue because businesses have an expectation that their employees will be available and plugged in whenever they want them?
Well, absolutely. And having that culture and talking to the companies and the bosses who have their workers out on the roads going on service calls or going on jobs. When the boss calls, you want to answer that phone call. And how many times have I stopped somebody and who are you talking to? You're either talking to your wife or your boss. And it's usually they're late for an appointment. There's an immediate emergency that they need to be aware of. It's really not an emergency. You know, there is an exception if you're calling 911, but calling the school that's saying you're going to be late to pick up your kids is not an emergency. You got to pull over and stop. And so we need to change that culture. You go to bed at night and you turn your phone off, you put it on the charge, you wake up in the morning and you have 10 messages waiting for you, and it's all fine. But yet you get in your car and you drive for 45 minutes, you can't have that. There's a culture of saying that you can't be away from being connected to your social networks for those 45 minutes. But there's so many things. You're in a meeting now, and you have your phone off on silent, and you're going to pick up your messages later. So we need to change that culture. We need to make it socially unacceptable, make it uncool, and give people the liberty to be able to put that phone down with pride and say, I will get my messages when I'm ready and able. And change your voicemail message to, if I'm driving, I'm not going to pick up the phone. So your boss knows, your family knows that there's a chance that I may be driving right now. So turn your alerts off. The fact that you see that little red light, you feel that vibration, or you hear that ding, it's overwhelming. Oh, it's overwhelming. You want to pull it out and find out what's going on. Turn it off. Just, if you don't know, ignorance maybe is bliss, but it's not that important.
For years, opposition parties have raised concerns over third-party spending during elections in this province. Others have called for Ontario to follow the federal lead and take corporate and union donations out of the funding mix. Finally, after allegations of improper fundraising practices last spring, Ontario's Liberal government has a bill before the House to reform election financing rules. Joining us now with the opposition party's views on whether the proposed law strikes the right balance, we welcome Randy Hillier, PC member for Lanark, Frontenac, Lennox and Addington; Catherine Fife, the NDP member for Kitchener-Waterloo; and Mike Schreiner, who's the leader of the Green Party of Ontario. I am happy to welcome the three of you back to TVO. We should say our producer, Mark Brosens, asked more than a dozen Liberals to appear on the program, and none was available. And so we are Liberalist today, but we are happy that you are here. Let's go through, shall we? Sheldon, bring this up if you would. This is Bill 2, the Election Finances Statute Law Amendment Act. If passed, it would bar corporations and unions from making political donations. It would cap individual donations at $3,600 per year, and that would be split evenly amongst the parties, candidates, and riding associations. Currently, individuals can donate up to $33,000 plus per year. It would introduce a per-vote subsidy for political parties. Starting in 2017, the subsidy would be $2.71 per vote for the year, but that would decline to $2.21 per vote in 2020. Third-party organizations currently have no spending limit on their political advertising. Under this bill, they would be limited to $100,000 during an election campaign. Donations to party leadership candidates would be capped at $1,200 per individual. Currently, there is no limit. This is some of what's in the mix of the new bill, and I want to know what you guys think. Randy Hillier, start us off.
Well, I think to start off with is just a reflection on what brought us here. This Cash for Access scandal, where the Liberal Party was having significant, expensive stakeholder fundraisers with people that are doing business with ministers, energy companies, green energy companies. The optics were tacky at best. Many people have used other terms, but it was people paying big money to gain access to people who could sign contracts.
And apparently the Premier now agrees with you that the optics were lousy, and she's put these new changes into place.
So there's a number of good changes. Getting rid of corporate and union donations, absolutely fine. But it hasn't dealt with the ministers dealing with the people that they're doing contracts with. Union and corporate money is out of it. However, personal contributions, they've been reduced. But there's still many loopholes left in the system.
Okay,
and
hold
I'm sure
that
we'll
thought.
talk about them.
We'll look at loopholes. Catherine Fife, your initial take on this package?
Yeah, no, as a member who traveled across the province this summer, listening to the voices of Ontarians express their concern with what they called an apparent conflict of interest. I mean, and actually they were supported by the Integrity Commissioner in his last finding, is that when you have a minister who has directed stakeholders, be they electricity or infrastructure, and they're paying $5,000 apiece to sit just with you in a room, that is very concerning, and so and people expressed that over the summer.
So they're going to get rid of that?
No, I mean
Not quite?
no, they're not, because the conflict of interest. We raised the issue of raising the bar on conflict of interest and having a stronger oversight over that for the Integrity Commissioner. That was not supported by the Liberals. So it's true the limit will be reduced now to $1,200, but there's still nothing to stop a minister from, as the bill is constructed right now, from having that meeting. Now, the Attorney General says there's more to come, but they had the chance to introduce a full bill that would address conflict of interest, which would address government advertising, which would address the fact that research, polling, and travel is still exempt from campaign expenses, for instance. So there's not only some loopholes, there's a side door and a back door. And it's frustrating as a member who, invested a lot of time and energy and wanted to be respectful of the voices that we heard across the province and have a bill that reflected that.
Mike Schreiner.
Well, the bottom line is people want big money out of politics. And the bill, as it's currently written, still doesn't get big money out of politics. The fact that somebody can still donate $3,600 to a party and its associations, I don't know how many people have $3,600 to donate. Most don't. And the bill doesn't fully address the Cash for Access scandal that really led to this issue exploding. It's interesting, about 6 months ago, I was here and we were talking about this very issue. And I said, you know what, if people know what's going on, this issue is going to explode. And you had a former Liberal cabinet minister who said, oh, no, you're making too much out of this. But now that the information's come out, people are outraged. They want it fixed. They want big money out of politics.
If you're going to lower limits or decline to allow unions or corporations to contribute, the money's got to come from somewhere. And his argument was, find me a better way to raise the amount of money we need to run campaigns. And okay, have you found a better way to raise the money to run campaigns?
Well, I think the per vote allowance that's in the legislation is the right way to go. And if you think about it right now, we have a pay-to-play system. We actually fund political parties. It's through tax donation credits and reimbursements. And so if you have big money and deep pockets, you get access to politicians, and you get a tax receipt funded by taxpayers. The better way to go is what I call vote to play, which is you vote, and your vote directs some money to political parties. And that is then open to everybody in Ontario. Everyone can participate in funding political parties. That's a much better way to go. It's more democratic, it's more fair, it puts all voters on a level playing field. One of the provisions that we think is going to be introduced into the bill, we haven't seen it yet, is actually banning participation of political candidates, MPPs, anyone in any fundraiser.
Hold off on that. I'm
Okay,
going to get to that
we
later.
should get to that because that actually is going way too far in the other direction.
I understand. I'm going to get to that later. But let me pick up on the angle that I think the NDP would be concerned about, which is you obviously depend on unions across this province for resources, for money, people power, and so on. Is it a problem for the NDP if you ban union donations?
Well, listen, we supported a full ban on union and corporate donations. And we welcome actually a shift in the culture around talking about the impact that money has on politics. And if you look at down in the States, Bernie Sanders raised $27 per person. I mean, people, recognized that they wanted to support him as a candidate, and even though they didn't have a lot of money, they donated. And there's a big difference between these Toronto fundraisers and the fundraisers we have in our riding association. When someone comes to my, spaghetti dinner at the Legion, it's really a vote of confidence. They're saying, you know what, I want to support you. I like the work you're doing. $20, $50, what have you. And I think when we moved forward into this process, we were supposed to have the elector at the center, and those electors had genuine concerns about the impact that money had on policy and on legislation. And they were very clear about that. They felt that their interests were coming second to those who could buy influence.
And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety if you like. They're all on our website, tvo.org, on our iTunes channel, and on the YouTube channel at youtube.com/theagenda.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit tvo.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.